Welcome to Intentional Conversations. Conversations designed to inspire you, to ignite something inside of you, and to empower you to live a more intentional life that's full of meaning, fulfillment, and impact. I'm joined today by Jackie Eldridge. Jackie is an author, she's a speaker, she's a professor, and she is the founder of Hearts and Minds Matter, which is a professional development company that works with educators to build inclusion and community. I'm really excited to have her on to talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is basically the path to self-actualization. So this is something I'm so interested in, and I know that you will be too. So come on in and let's get started. Hey, Jackie, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here.
Hey Mel, thanks a lot for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So before we get started, something I always ask everyone who's a guest is I want to know what the word intention means to you. So I'd love to hear your interpretation of the word intention.
So for me, intention is really important. It's something that we actively engage in. We set our minds to doing something and we take action. And we always revisit our intention because it may be that our action actually doesn't work out, and that's fine. We don't want to beat ourselves up. We want to go back to the intention and rejig it if we need to. But it's really important to set an intention for whatever it is that we're doing.
I love that. That's perfect. Awesome. So the reason why I'm so excited to have you on is because I know from the work that you do, you talk a lot about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Exactly.
And what's interesting is that literally in the past like several weeks, that's come into my awareness. And I think I've heard it like in passing in the past, but it's not something I'm familiar with or have studied or learned about in the past. And so literally in the past several weeks, 3 people have mentioned it in conversation. And I know from my relationship with you that it's pretty much one of the foundational pieces of the books you write, the talks you give, the work you do with Hearts and Minds Matter. And so I really was excited about having you on, and we can really talk about this Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So could you just give us a really brief sort of understanding of what is it?
Okay, so the work of Maslow, the hierarchy of needs, goes back as far as 1943 when he developed it. So it's not new. It's quite an old theory. And what Maslow says is that we have, each of us from childhood all the way to the end of our life, we have a hierarchy of needs. And each need builds upon the other need. So the basic needs are physiological needs. So in physiological needs, we need food, we need shelter, we need rest. We need to really take care of those basic needs before we can actually move up the hierarchy to other needs. And then the second level is safety. And this for me is a really important one because it's about building safe communities no matter where we find ourselves, whether we find ourselves in schools or in the corporate world, whatever we're doing, we all have a need to feel safe. And that's safety of emotional safety as well as physical safety. So when those needs are met, we can then move up the next level, which becomes love and belonging. And this one is the one that is going to drive us. So the bottom one is a basic need. This one, safety, and the next one, love and belonging, are our psychological needs. They are our need to belong. We don't live in caves. We live in cities, towns, wherever we live, we are always interacting with each other. And so it's important for us to feel that sense of love and belonging, because when we don't feel it, we feel excluded, and excluded leads to a lot of stress for us. It leads to us feeling like we're not part of things. We're on the outside somehow. So again, going back to wherever we find ourselves, whether that be in school or in business, if our environment allows us to feel like we're loved or appreciated and that we belong there, That's going to drive us forward to the next psychological need, which is to build our self-esteem. And so that's the second from the top. And when we don't have physiological safety and love and belonging needs met, we're going to find a challenge developing a really solid self-esteem, because we are going to feel excluded, or we're going to feel less than, or not good enough. We're going to be finding it a challenge to complete tasks and really feel good about who we are. So we want to make sure, whether, as I said, be in school or in business, we want to make sure that all of these levels are there. When they're there, we can then begin to reach into our self-actualization. And Maslow would say that we're actually always self-actualizing, but we have to have the other needs in place as well. And when we can self-actualize, we can solve problems, make decisions, and it really brings out our creativity. So that last bit is really our self-fulfillment area. The self-actualization area is about us feeling fulfilled.
Mm. And so I'd love for you to explain for everyone listening, how do you define, I think self-actualization is a big word. And so I'd love to hear, can you simplify that a bit and let us know? Because it sounds like that's sort of the end goal, and like one builds on the next, and that's sort of where we're headed. So what's a simplistic way to explain self-actualization?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of the work I do, in addition to the work with Maslow, I use a lot of Simon Sinek's work in terms of finding our why, or what is our life purpose. So we can achieve our why when we get into that area of higher esteem and self-actualization, because it's really about understanding and filtering out all of the other things that aren't really that important to us, so that we can live in our why, so that we can become self-fulfilled. So we drive ourselves forward in our purpose. And going back to intention, it's actually about fulfilling our intentions as well.
Yeah, I love that. So, okay, so I am curious. So so the safety and the love and belonging, those are two sort of separate pieces, or are those the same?
Well, according to Maslow, there's separate levels. But for me, in the work that I do, particularly the work that I do with educators, we have to understand what safety means. And people often, when they hear simply the term safety, I think what they're thinking is, we don't want people to get hurt. We don't want people to be victims of crime or something like that. And of course, that physical safety is important, and we all want to ensure that we have that. But the emotional safety is just as important. And we cannot, if we don't feel safe in someone's presence, or in, let's say, in a classroom, or in our offices or places of work, if we don't access that feeling of safety because someone is providing it for us and we are accepting it, we're not going to feel loved, and we're not going to feel like we belong. And so it doesn't matter where you are in the world, whether you're in school, whether you're a parent and you're trying to create that environment for your own children, or whether you're the CEO of a company, if you are not paying attention to that level of Maslow, that level on the hierarchy, building a safe environment, people will not feel like they belong. And so we want to do everything we can to break down any barriers that are causing us to feel excluded from that emotional safety.
Great. So we'll come back to that, but I am curious, what, in a lot of the work that you've done, whether it's books that you've written or talks that you're giving or Hearts and Minds Matter, which is all about where you guys are working with educators and you're building inclusion and community. So
Right.
I'd love to know, what was your inspiration, your motivation for having this hierarchy of needs be infused in everything you do?
So the inspiration for me is most definitely a result of my background. So for me, when I was growing up, I grew up in an abusive home. So my home was not a safe place. And I viewed school as a safe place because I was very fortunate when I was a young child going up through particularly the primary and junior and intermediate grades, I had wonderful teachers who really understood this concept of building a safe learning environment. And so I was inspired by them to try to figure out, well, how do teachers do that? What do they do to create an environment where kids are going to want to come every day, where they're going to want to feel nurtured and cared for? And so my doctoral work is around that. It's around creating a safe place. And it's around, what do we do? How do we understand that? How do we understand caring and compassion so that kids want to be with us? So that's really been my driving force. And I'm very, very passionate about working with teachers and really all educators to help them understand how important that is. More and more we're seeing in the world where people don't feel safe. They don't feel emotionally safe. Many people don't feel physically safe. Sometimes they don't feel spiritually safe. So we want to really understand. And it's not good enough just to say, well, I'm a teacher, or I'm a caregiver, or I'm a parent, and therefore I care. Caring is actually not a passive thing. It's a very active thing, and we have to develop what I call a caregiving consciousness. So when we have a caregiving consciousness, we are consciously aware of what we're doing, how we're creating the environment for whoever is with us.
I love that. And I'm curious because in terms of the safety piece, I agree with you. I think that it's so much deeper than just your physical safety. I think energetic safety is everything. Even for those people that didn't grow up in an abusive home. Like, I just think, I know for me, that's the biggest thing. Like, I need to feel energetically safe in order to open, in order to grow, that kind of thing. So I see that. I'm curious how, so are we putting, is the responsibility on the environment, or how can the person, like, you were fortunate enough that you went to school and that safety was found in school. But what about for people that don't necessarily have a quote unquote safe home life or a safe outlet? Is there a way, and let's just say they're adults, right? Because I think people, go through life and there are certain things we're not aware of. So how can someone bring that up internally versus look for it in the external world?
Yeah, so it's interesting because the work on resilience, the research on resilience is very clear that in order to be resilient, which all of this goes hand in hand, they're all highly interconnected. So in order for us to feel resilience, learn to be resilient, we need to have some protective factors. And we access those protective factors in our families, in our communities, and in our schools. So the work of someone like Bonnie Bernard, for example, who talks about those factors as being the protective factors. So you could be a person like me who it was not safe in my home, but because my school was safe, I was able to get that need met. Because I had people in my community, I had families on my street who sort of took me in, if you will, and definitely nurtured me. And so I was getting those the protective factors there. And I think that's what allowed me to be resilient. That's what allowed me to move up those levels. And so for us, if home is not safe, school and community needs to also be a part of the equation. And then if school is not safe, family and community. So you can see how they all go together. And I think that in our world right now, we're constantly being bombarded with messages that the world is not safe. And that scares me a little bit because I think, yeah, there's parts of the world that are not safe, and there's a lot going on that helps us to not feel safe, or especially the emotional safety. But there are other ways that people can access safety. And if we build the layers from the bottom of the pyramid up, all the way up to the top, then people will find it in their world. But it is very much like the proverb that it takes a village to raise a child. So if someone is not feeling safe in their home, the rest of us have to step in and help that happen. We all have a collective responsibility. It's not the individual's responsibility. And there are people who fall through the cracks, no doubt. And there are situations where others feel like they're doing something to care for a child. So a classic example of that might be a parent who spanks their child. So the child is getting the message from their parent that, oh, this caregiving thing means somebody has to hit me. And actually that's what John Dewey would call a miseducative experience. So while the parent thinks they're caregiving and trying to teach the child or give the child a message or a lesson, it's actually miseducative for the child. So that's where the caregiving consciousness for me has to come in, where we have to really understand, well, what does that actually mean? What does it mean to give care to someone? And what does it mean to develop a safe place?
Yeah, and so in my mind, I'm sort of wondering why, and obviously I'm not questioning Maslow, but it's curious because sometimes I find that we find that safety through that love and belonging. So I'm curious why it's not like, okay, so you have your physiological needs, but then having that love and belonging, and then through that, we then feel safe.
Yes, I see what you're saying. And that's why it's interesting that those levels on the pyramid, the safety and the love and belonging, they're part of the psychological aspect of what Maslow is trying to teach. And so we could view it as physiological needs, safety needs, love and belonging needs, or we could view it as once we get past those physiological needs, the levels of safety, love and belonging, and esteem really do go hand in hand. And so when I'm working with teachers, for example, I'm trying to get them to understand that you're not compartmentalizing things. You're not doing, okay, let's do safety today, let's do love and belonging tomorrow, let's do esteem the next day. They all intertwine together. And so bringing that out, but understanding the importance of safety is really going to be the framework. Because if I'm a teacher who is not creating a safe learning environment for my students because I'm chaotic, I don't have good classroom management, I'm yelling at the kids all the time, I don't have a prayer for them to actually move up. So I need to step back and separate it a little bit to really truly understand, how am I going to create a safe environment? And I believe it's the truth in business as well. Outside of the world of academia or education, it's the same thing. You hear this from people all the time. I hate my job. I don't want to go in there. I don't feel safe. There's people who are gossiping. There's the boss is always yelling at us. The deadlines are unreasonable. All of that is creating a safe place.
Mm-hmm. So in the corporate sector, I'm curious, where does that responsibility lie in order to create a safe space?
Well, we're talking about adults. And so there's a little part of that that is for sure individual responsibility, because I truly believe that we are all individually responsible for ourselves. And that if we are not feeling safe, we can take steps to change that. But I think in terms of creating the environment or the culture, that's often the way it's referred to as the culture of the school, the culture of the organization. In terms of the culture, it's definitely comes from the top. You can see that in schools all the time. If the principal is not running a caring, nurturing school, it's not going to be safe. No matter how hard the teachers try, there's going to be an element that's missing. So it's kind of a top-down approach, if you will. So the leader sets the tone, the leader models, the leader demonstrates how they want it to be created, and then that filters down to everybody. So then it becomes that village where everybody's in it together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I agree with that. And there is another part of me that does believe that energetically, one person, even if they're not the quote unquote leader of the organization of the school, they can, exactly like you're saying, take responsibility And instead of buying into that, I hate my job, this place is toxic, whatever the things are that you normally hear, they can simply shift their own energy. And then, of course, through that, we see things differently.
Yes.
With that being said, I do understand in a corporate sector or a school sector, there is the leadership comes from the top. What
Yes.
would you say to someone who is working in a job or working in a school, whatever that looks like, but ultimately working for someone else and things aren't shifting? Like, are there options, or is the only option to leave? Like how, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's part of me that can feel like that's a little hopeless. And I know, listen, I worked in corporate, I get it. And ultimately I left and went into
Right.
business for myself, but not everyone wants to do that or can
That's
do
right.
that, you know?
That's
So
right.
what would you say to that person who's struggling?
So what I'm seeing as you're talking is the image of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, to be honest, because so, if the person's basic needs are being met and their safety needs are at risk because we have some chaos or toxicity happening, then as an adult, it's up to you, I think, to develop your individual responsibility and take measures to actually make a difference. If we get into the mindset like this is a toxic environment, there's nothing that I can do about it, there's nothing you can do about it because you'll be stuck, right? You'll just see it as nothing can change here. And I can't leave because I have a mortgage, I have kids, I have all this stuff. But actually, that's not the truth. The truth is we can do something about it. So we can do things like we can talk to the boss, or we can talk to whoever is our next direct report or who we're reporting to. We can come up with solutions and make ideas be known. We can maybe participate in committees. We can do all of that kind of thing. But if we keep telling ourselves we can't do it, we won't do it. And so ultimately, we all do have a choice to leave the job. Now, that's risky, but if you have had the environment and you have been able to access safety, love, and belonging, and your self-esteem is building up, you're going to see more tools for yourself. You're going to see the bigger picture. And so maybe it is that you actually do have to leave that job because it's making you sick, or you're feeling angry all the time. Now that might mean you change your lifestyle. So you were, you were making $100,000 a year, and now you're making $30,000 a year. That's a huge shift. It's very scary. It's very risky. There are probably other people involved. In other words, your family or close friends, but you can actually do it and then use the time to look for something else that's more aligned with your values and your goals. But I think when we get that mindset of we can't because it's not safe or it's too risky, we're going to be stuck. I mean, I jumped off a cliff, to be honest with you. I was an administrator at the university, and I didn't feel, it wasn't that I didn't feel safe. I felt safe. I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel respected. And I literally went in one day and I said, that's it, I'm leaving. And I gave my notice. I jumped off a cliff and I didn't have anywhere else to go. But I knew in my heart that what was happening was not fulfilling my purpose. It was causing me a lot of stress. And I was not being fulfilled. And so I took a risk. But
What level,
not everybody can do that.
what level were you? I'm just curious because you said you felt safe, right?
Yep.
So using your example, were you in love and belonging, or were you actually at self-esteem?
Well, I think I was kind of hovering around the esteem self-actualization levels on the pyramid because I felt confident enough that what I was experiencing was not me. It was not my purpose. And I was frustrated. And so I did have enough confidence to be able to use my self-actualization to get out of that job and to find something else. And literally the next day I had a job offer. And so, and I've been, sort of more or less in that job ever since. And then I also took a step further to create Hearts and Minds Matter. But I think it's a mistake to think that we will always be stuck because we need the money or because we need the job or whatever it is. Yes, those things are true. And I'm not recommending that everybody jump off a cliff. Please don't take from that, because that was a little bit stressful in and of itself. But I knew I had to do it because I felt if I'm going to be stuck here and I'm not going to be able to self-actualize if I don't do this.
Yeah. Okay. So here's my question. Again, thank you for bringing up the personal example, because what I guess for me, I was thinking it's almost like a video game, right? And you have to like master this level to get to the next, right? But in your case, you got to self-esteem slash self-actualization, but the truth is that you didn't feel safe. But it sounds like you were able to move through it where you were. You Right? Like you moved through the levels, you got to that. And then the truth of it, part of that self actualization was, hey, this is not a place I feel safe and that I can thrive. And so here's what I need to do.
Yes, I don't know that it's a checklist. Like, check, we've got our shelter, food, and water. Check, we feel safe. Check, we feel love and belonging. Because the fact is, people come and go from our lives. So I may be going along just fine in my job and everything is great, but then my boss changes, right? And so my boss changes. I mean, we see this in abusive relationships, right? Someone enters a relationship and everything feels great. They feel safe with that person. They feel like they belong. They're developing a relationship. Maybe their self-esteem has been developing over time and they feel pretty good about themselves. But this person comes into our life and abuses us to the point where breaks us down, right? Wears our self-esteem down to now we're back down into an area where we don't feel safe. And so I don't think they're check 1, check 2, check 3.
So, like, okay, that sounds good. So, you could essentially, it's almost like a balance. Like, you can feel relatively safe, energetically safe. Maybe it's not exactly where you want it to be, but you can still get a little bit of that sense of safety in order to move to the love and belonging. Again, a little bit of it. It may not be, this is not the ideal, but I know where I'm moving towards. I'm building my confidence. I'm building my self-esteem. And
Right.
so it doesn't have to be like 100% each.
Exactly.
It's not very linear, perhaps.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, so now I have a question. So this was really helpful looking at it in terms of, okay, for a school and with teachers, right? And I love the work you do it because I think that is so essential. Also for parents. I like it in corporations. I think that it's so needed in there. Is there a way? A lot of people who listen to this are people like me. I mean, they're entrepreneurs. They work essentially for themselves. They may have a small team. How does someone who isn't working for a corporation, that isn't a teacher, how or would someone like that use this hierarchy of needs in order to get to that place, which I think we're all moving towards, to be that transcendental state, the self-actualization? So could someone use it, and how would they use it if it's possible?
Yeah, so I think that once we get to a certain stage, like I like to say to teachers and parents, we need to launch our kids. Like, we can't keep our kids under our wing for their whole lives. That's not healthy. That's not going to serve them in any way. And so as a parent and a teacher, I want to be really knowledgeable about Maslow's work so that I can launch them. And once they are launched, it becomes this individual responsibility for us. So, I'm an entrepreneur too, and there are some times when I feel, because I can work from home, I can feel isolated. So it's then my responsibility to understand that and go out and seek community. I think it's a mistake to think that those of us maybe who work from home, that we don't ever leave the house. Well, we need the community. We need that protective factor. So we go out and we find like-minded people. We find other entrepreneurs, or we rely on our friends and families. We join mastermind groups. We take courses. All of these kinds of things are us going out and about to find our group, our people who are really going to support us in whatever way we need. And if we join a mastermind group and it doesn't work out, we move to a different one. We don't just stay stuck. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy if we're continually telling ourselves that we can't. So I think it's also a mindset and an energy shift to, what do I need in order to move up, to attain all my levels, and then go out and get it. Go out and find it.
Yeah, I love that. That's been the biggest thing for me in my life, even outside of being an entrepreneur, is finding the groups. I think we all are yearning for people to reflect to us and to be around people where we can have more meaningful conversations and like we can support each other and grow each other. And so I can see how, again, looking at those levels, like once you have that, the safety, love, and belonging to me is like one thing. So I'm just going to call it that. Mm-hmm. Then from there, we then start building that confidence, that creativity, that like inner knowing. And then of course, that's when we evolve.
Yeah. And, just as you're talking, Mel, I'm thinking, this is outside of Maslow. I think that it's important for us, because you and I talk about this a lot, to really make the mind-body connection. So if I'm feeling low or blue, or I'm feeling sad, or I have feelings of anger, I need to go into my body and find out, well, where is that sitting, so that it's giving me, that's my intuition. It's giving me a lot of messages there that I can then act upon. If we ignore that mind-body connection, we're going to miss a lot of things. So while this is not Maslow's work, mindfulness is a big piece of what I do, both in my personal and professional life.
Yeah. And I would be curious to see how, even though it's not necessarily like the mindfulness and the mind-body connection, is it necessarily part of the levels that Maslow created? Where I see it, I can sort of see that, because to me, the body never lies. The body's always giving us messages. I almost see that as being that physiological. Like, so you got to come back down, and perhaps you tell me, get kind of clear. And then once we have that clarity, then that builds the safety. Like, you're not going to die. You're okay. It's just the body is sort of having a reaction to something perhaps in the reality. So you get clear, you kind of start at that level one. And then from there, with a deeper understanding, you're feeling safe. And then perhaps you're finding, in terms of the love and belonging, maybe you're finding a chiropractor that speaks your language, or a naturopath, or something along those lines. Maybe? Yeah,
I can definitely see where you're going with that, and it makes sense. In Maslow's terms, he's talking about basic survival, though. He's, like literally we can get by without understanding mindfulness and without making the mind-body connection. We can't get by without food, water, shelter, sleep. So in his terms, that's where he's going. It's really survival needs. But in the rest of it, I don't know. I've never really thought about it that way. I really see what you're saying. I feel like in a way it's self-actualization, though, really trying to find out, what do I actually need? What's important for me? Can I actually do this? So going back to the job situation, can I jump off a cliff and figure out a way to survive that until I find something that's more closely aligned with my values? Or am I going to stay stuck, in which case I'm not going to be able to self-actualize as much as I would like to. I'm not going to find the fulfillment that I need. So
possibly, or just to give another perspective on that, what I see, and listen, I've done both. I mean, I'm done. I'm leaving. I'm selling my house. I'm moving to Italy, right? I don't know. People look at me and they're like, that takes so much courage. I'm like, I don't know. Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it was me running away, welcome to my therapy sessions. But, but for me, it's like, real self-actualization, sometimes we need to make that leap and we need to jump and we need to risk. And there are other times self-actualization can come from, hey, I'm going to stay in the situation that's incredibly uncomfortable and it's not serving me. And I'm going to work on myself and understand why I'm here, what I need to learn from this, and then move. Like, just as another perspective, I don't think either way is right or wrong. And there are times in my life where I've chosen to stay in a situation to do just that. And there are other times where I'm like, done, take the
Yes,
leap.
right. And I can see how I've done that in my life too, where I have been in an uncomfortable situation, an uncomfortable relationship, whatever, and I stayed there to experience the discomfort so that I can actually look at it and I can learn from it. And, we can't be flitting around from one thing to the next to find it. Sometimes we have to give ourselves permission to stay in the discomfort because there's learning in everything.
Mm-hmm.
So if we stop and we look at, well, why am I so uncomfortable here? Like, why, and in my body, why are my shoulders so tense all the time? Or why am I clenching my fists all the time? What's that about? So I'm actually teaching myself in that way. Or I may be seeking therapy or a coach who's going to help me to get the clearer picture. But we can't get the clear picture if we don't allow ourselves to feel safe. And the physiological needs are not met. I think if I was a person homeless on the street, not having any shelter and having to beg for food or money, I don't know if self-actualization and what's this body tension all about, I don't know if I'm ready for that. So, I think that we have to, the physiological needs for sure need to be met so that we can move ourselves up. And it's not about running away. And if we do run away, what's that about? Right? Just ask yourself the question, wow, am I running away? Yeah, I think I ran away. Okay, so why did you do that? So you're just having to work through it and teach yourself. But I think that to do that, you need that sense of the other levels there, the safety, the love and belonging, and the esteem.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, going back to the physiological level, that first level, the like, we need water to survive, right? We need food to survive. Because this model was created, I think you said 1943, it's been a long time. Well, something that I talk a lot about, and I see it in my own life, is our primitive brain, right? Like, it's all about survival. And so we allow that primitive brain and that DNA that's in us to make our decisions. And so we actually don't take the risks. We don't move forward because we're making decisions using the brain, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So is there part of this that, because for the most part, I understand there are some cases where people that are homeless or in other, certain situations, they don't have food, they don't have water. But for those of us that have the basics, is like, I want you to speak a little bit to that, because the people listening to this, they've got those basics, right? Mm-hmm. So what do we need to know about that physiological level?
So I would say if we're continually operating from the reptilian brain, and we're not actually spending the time in any kind of development of our esteem or self-actualization, on some level, we don't feel safe. So the reptilian brain is really fight or flight. And it's really meant to help us to survive. So we back in primitive times, people learned to fight or flee or freeze. Actually, there's a third one there, which is freeze, because there were real threats to our livelihood. But over time, those threats were minimized and disappeared. not to say that those threats don't still exist in the world, because they do, particularly people who are living in war-torn countries. Those threats are real. That's fight or flight right there, or freeze. And so I think what we do when we notice that we're always operating from our reptilian brain and everything is operating from fight or flight, we're in our sympathetic nervous system. We're doing things that are creating a lot of harm for us, because when we're constantly in sympathetic nervous system, we're actually, our cortisol is whipping through our bodies. It's keeping us in that sympathetic nervous system that's going to create all kinds of health, physical and emotional challenges and spiritual challenges for us. So when we notice, when we take the time to be present and really understand that we're operating from the reptilian brain, we need to give ourselves permission to take a risk, to slow down, look at it, go inside for our inner wisdom. I mean, both you and I are Coaches Training Institute trained, and so we know that people are creative, resourceful, and whole. And so the answers are inside of us, but we need to understand what it is that we need. As well, we need to be able to offer that to others. So if I'm a teacher in a classroom and I'm noticing that my student is acting out all the time, or they're withdrawn and there's a lot of challenges, maybe academically they're not at the grade level, my responsibility as their teacher and just as a fellow human being is to look at that and see, how can I support them? How can I help them move past that reptilian brain and move forward?
There's so many things here. I've got like literally 1,000 questions going through my mind.
And I've got 1,000 things to say to you as well.
Okay, so I just want to say this real quick as you were sort of breaking it down, going back to, and I'm not trying to mess with the model. This model's great, but I can see the ways where that when we're in that primitive brain state and we're not taking those risks and we're not listening, right? Yes. We're not moving up. As we know, I mean, I talk about this all the time, the body then takes it on.
Yes.
And so just as something to offer people, so the body is taking it on to kind of help like wake up, listen, right? So I just want to kind of drive that back. I'm just trying to give people a different context to where it's like, how can we use this model to like know, like, so instead of having judgment around, I have a good friend and she just threw her shoulder out. And so it's like, and there's a lot happening in her reality with her husband, and it's the shoulder on the right side, which is the masculine. And I'm like, hello, like, so it's like one of those things, how we can use, because we're all on the path of self-actualization. We're all on this path. This is why we came here. This is why our soul came here in this human body, to have these experiences, to learn, to grow, to evolve. Right. And so I think listening is a big piece of it. And so I just want to keep driving that back home, that it's kind of, you can see how it is self-actualization to have an understanding of, oh, okay, let me look at this pain in the body differently, or let me look at what's happening in the body differently than it's happening to me, kind of thing.
Yeah, so I'll give you a concrete example that many of your listeners have probably experienced because it's such a big thing nowadays. Is about 20 years ago, I woke up one morning and I felt like I couldn't move. It felt to me like I had the worst case of the flu I'd ever had. And my kids were younger, and I had to get them ready for school. I was a full-time teacher, all of this kind of stuff. But I did what I always do. I just sucked it up and got on with it. And then at the end of the day, I just collapsed into bed, and I felt exhausted. And so I got up the next day, still felt some pain, but I went on with it. And then a couple of days later, it came back tenfold. And I knew that the flu didn't come and go like that. So I went to my doctor, and long story short, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. Well, at that time, I would say I was probably self-actualizing. I was taking courses. I was professionally developing all the time. But I wasn't listening to my body, and I wasn't paying attention to um, the experiences that happened around that. I simply thought, oh, I suddenly wake up and now I have fibromyalgia. But when I started to piece it together and to listen to what was going on for me emotionally, cognitively, and then putting that together with my body, that I realized right before I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, I had written my doctoral dissertation that was an autobiography of my story growing up in an abusive home. So my interpretation of the fibromyalgia that I experience, because many, many people have been diagnosed with it and not everybody has the same experience that I do. But for me, that fibromyalgia was my body saying, you need to look at this. You need to stop, pay attention, and you need to work on it. And so, yeah, it's about listening. What's going on in your world right now? It's not about living our lives blindly. I mean, there's a lot of people who just, it's kind of zombie-like. I was recently here in Toronto, or in Ontario, we have, it's called the GO train, and it's a commuter train. And I just was recently there getting ready to take this train just down not far from Toronto. And I looked up at all these people. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I felt like I was watching zombies walking down this little hill or little ramp to get to the GO train. They had their heads down. Many of them were on their cell phones. They all looked exhausted. And I thought, oh my God, like, is this what your day is like, day in and day out? So we have individual responsibility for ourselves, and it's not easy. You know what? Life is not easy. But in order to find our fulfillment, we have to pay attention. We have to wake up.
Yeah, I love that you actually just use that example, because I agree. It breaks my heart a little. Like, I'll do that all the time. I'll go have like lunch by myself just to more like observe. It's fascinating.
It's
But it's
fascinating.
curious, and tying it back to this model, I think that a lot of times people, and I'd love your opinion on this, like they're almost finding safety, which it's not really safety, but finding safety in their devices.
Oh, somebody said to me yesterday, so here in Canada, we have the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, CAMH. CAMH has just opened a new addiction group for people who are addicted to the internet. And their definition of addiction to a device is if you wake up in the morning and either before you go to the bathroom or while you're in the bathroom, you have your device with you, you're addicted. Well, I'm here to tell you, I know a lot of people who are addicted. So yes, it's easy. It's easy for us to escape into sleep. It's easy for us to escape into drugs and alcohol. It's easy for us to escape into any number of addictions. And probably the biggest one that, I mean, maybe the devices and the internet are taking over this one, but it's easy for us to escape into work. We can just bury ourselves in work. So it's really, to me, it's an awakening. And so sort of going back to Maslow, I feel like, when I work with this hierarchy of needs, I think it's a tool. It's not the answer to everything. It's just a tool for us to be aware of. And how can we in this world, and in 2019, now more than any other time in my lifetime, and I'm not a spring chicken, in my lifetime, we need to pay attention to these needs, because they are being trod on in so many different ways. I mean, let's look at the Amazon rainforest. The place is burning. What's this doing to our world? And yet, why do we sit back and be complacent about that? Why do we bury ourselves in other things when it's actually a fact? I saw this thing the other day. It was like this, sort of drone going over it and showing the pictures. We can't sit back anymore. We have to have safe places
Yeah.
And we have to include people so that they feel that they are loved and appreciated and that they belong, so we can take action. Otherwise, we're just going to sit back.
Yes, and I agree. And I think that it really is curious that it ties into what we were just talking about with the technology piece, because I think that as humans, we actually need connection. We need
Yes.
that, right? We need that community. Um, and the rain, that's a prime example. It's like, wake up. You know what I'm saying? We've got our TVs on and we're looking at the stuff that's happening in the world, political, like politically. And it's like, whoa, like I read somewhere that the Amazon, that's like the heartbeat of the earth. You know
Yes.
what I'm saying? And I think that a lot of times, I think bringing it back to sort of the hierarchy of needs, it's about like having, it's that the love and the belonging, the togetherness, and the devices are keeping us divisive, which is curious at that word, because our world right now is very divisive. And I think like having our needs are met. So now how can we have more inclusion, going back to your word, like having more inclusion. And it starts, like you're saying, with the schools. It starts with the corporations. It starts, if you're an entrepreneur, find your group of people. Like that is part of the collective, is like, I think we all have a responsibility to do our part.
Yeah. And if we think that we can do certain things alone, we're fooling ourselves. I forget what the quote is. It's an African proverb that's something like, if you want to go fast, go together. If you want to go slow,
If,
go alone. Or
no, it says, if you, it's on my, it's my email signature line. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
that's it. So that is such a valuable quote. You know, the truth is, there are many people in the world who are introverts, and then there are people who are extroverts. And we don't want to step on the introverts' toes to say, well, you got to do it our way. You got to be an extrovert. You got to do everything collectively and collaboratively. Well, that's actually not true. We have to do some things collectively and collaboratively, but we can also do some things alone. But for certain things, we have to understand the power of working together, the power of building inclusion and community. And in the case of world events, we can't do that alone. You know,
Mhm.
it's the Stephen Covey work of our sphere of influence. So
Mhm.
what's my sphere of influence? I have a certain sphere of influence, but if I sit back and say I can't do anything about anything, well, I'm not contributing. Whereas now, you know, it's like, you know, in the US, there's a political situation. We have a political situation in Canada where we need to get out and vote. I'm going to give my little plug there for voting, because, you know, are we going to sit back and be complacent and think that we can't do anything about things? Of course we can.
Mhm.
But we need to, for young kids, which is why I love the work that I do working with teachers, because I'm working with people who are getting kids when they're 3 and 4 years old. And then they have them until, you know, they're 17, 18, 19 years old. So that's a perfect opportunity to create an environment for kids that they do feel safe, they feel like they belong, that they are appreciated and loved, and we're going to work to help them develop their self-esteem. So when they get out in the world, they've got the skills and the tools to really feel like they can make a difference. They can become a part of a group. But if we don't create that environment for people, they'll be at risk.
Absolutely. And I love everything you just said. And I just want to also tie it back to people that are not necessarily teachers or in schools or in corporations. What you were saying earlier was, yes, sometimes, you know, people do things alone. Sometimes we do things together. But I think ultimately it's all of our responsibility, like as a collective, for me, if I'm seeing something, to empower and support others and give that sense of safety and that sense of belonging to others for the purpose of them moving forward as well.
Yeah, you know, it's for the greater good. It's about doing no harm. I mean, I have many friends who work in the corporate world, and I've heard them say many times over the years, well, that's just the way the world is. That's just the way the corporate world is. You know, there's this, there's that, there's everything happening. Well, why is that just the way it is? There are plenty of examples in the world of large corporations who are doing phenomenal work with their employees. So it's not just the way corporate world is. It's not just the way a school is. It's the culture we create, and it's the framework and the foundation that we build. So if, you know, and a lot of work I'm doing right now is on trauma-informed approaches to various things. The work I'm doing is mostly trauma-informed schools and classrooms, but the statistics of people coming from trauma are exceedingly high. So like 1 in 6 people has met with some kind of trauma. So if you are a president or a CEO of a large corporation, imagine how many people are working for you who have experienced trauma.
Totally. And I want you real quick, because I know what you mean, but I want you to define what trauma is or what it can be.
So trauma can be actually quite minimal in the sense that when you're a young child, for example, you know, maybe you were bullied, which for some people can be just, oh my goodness, you know, really, does that person have to keep bugging me? But for another people, it can be devastating depending on the degree of trauma. So it can be that you failed a test, or you didn't get, you know, you didn't get into your school or your university or something like that. There's all sorts of trauma, right up to the worst possible trauma that can exist, which would be childhood sexual abuse, or coming from a war-torn country where you're daily being confronted with just horrific images and horrific experiences. So trauma is not necessarily something that requires somebody to have a post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis. It can be something much less than that, but people experience trauma. And so the more we are informed about things like statistics, we actually don't necessarily need to know what the specifics are of the trauma. Mm-hmm. We just need to know that it exists. And we need to be able to create the environment that's not going to put the person down or trigger them again.
Totally. I love this. I feel like we could go down a whole nother rabbit hole of this, but I'm going to bring it back. This was amazing. This was super helpful. And I think if anything, it gives people a deeper understanding and then ways to use this, this model, for lack of a better word. So I want to hear from you as we're closing it out. What is next for you? What are you really excited about? And of course, we'll link to all of your stuff on the show notes for people to follow you, get in touch with you, and that kind of thing. But I just want to hear what's next.
So I'm writing 2 books. One book is, I don't have a title for it yet, but it is definitely going to be something around trauma-informed schools and how teachers and educators, not just teachers, how educators can really understand this caregiving consciousness and how they can create safe places for their students. And so that's one project. And then the second book is that goes along. It's a companion book for the course Hearts and Minds Matter. That is the professional development work that I do with educators. So that book has a lot of this stuff. The foundation of it is Maslow, and Maslow emotional intelligence, the brain, information that we know about the brain and how this all relates, as well as the idea of resilience and how teachers can build inclusion and community in their classrooms so that we can work on these things. So those are my 2 big projects. I also have a talk that I have developed that is around this notion of safety, this idea of emotional safety for people. And that talk can be tailored to educators or the corporate world. And basically, I would say everything we talked about is in that talk.
Awesome. Yeah. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect. So to end, I always love to ask my guests to share one piece of advice that someone who's listening or watching can literally apply right now. That's very simple. That's very tangible. That could really help them as they're living a more intentional life, a more meaningful life. Right? And so I'd love for that tip to be kind of through the lens of this hierarchy of needs, since that's what we were discussing today.
So I guess my advice is to look at it. to become familiar with it, Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. Google it, it's all over the place. And to understand what that means for us as human beings in the world, not just teachers, not just CEOs or whoever we are, but just look, what do we need as human beings? And really self-reflect, spend time actually thinking, am I doing this? Am I helping the people that I'm involved with to move up this hierarchy of needs? Am I facilitating for them as well as myself? And look at the areas where I might be stuck. So it's about being honest. And, you know, Mel, you know this about me. One of my highest values is authenticity. And I think that being open and honest and real is going to really help us. So take the hierarchy, look at it. How are we moving through it ourselves, and how can we help others?
I love that. Super helpful. Thank you so much, Jackie. I so appreciate you coming on and sharing so much of your expertise with all of us. And I love that you highlighted that one of your values is authenticity, because you do always show up so authentically and giving of your heart. And I so appreciate it. And I think the work that you're doing, especially with the teachers and educators, is profound, and it's so essential at this time. Really, like, we need people to understand this, to be really working with the soul of the child, because things
Right.
have to shift. Like, on this conversation, like, things need to shift. People need to start waking up. We need to understand that, especially like these children, they are our future. Like, they are the next generation. And so empowering educators, empowering teachers, everyone, empowering parents, empowering leaders, more and more people to understand this. And you have a beautiful way, a very authentic and simple way of guiding people and showing them how they can use it. So thank you so much for being here and sharing so much of yourself and your work with all of us.
You're welcome. And thank you, Mel, because the work you're doing is amazing too.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Jackie. All right, take care. All right. Thank you so much for joining Jackie and me in this conversation. I feel like there's so much more to learn about this, and I'm so grateful for Jackie for coming on and giving us a better understanding of what this hierarchy of needs is and how we can use it in our life. Whether we're a teacher, whether we're a parent, whether we're an employee, whether we're a leader, whether we're an entrepreneur, all of us are here to experience some sort of self-actualization. And so having an understanding of these levels that can help empower us to live a more intentional life, to live a more purposeful life, to give back, and to support one another. So thank you so much for joining us. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know, what were your biggest insights? What were your biggest takeaways from today's conversation? We all grow together. We move forward together. So share it with us. All right, friend. Thank you so much for joining. As always, I so appreciate it. I love your support, and I'm so grateful to have people like Jackie coming on and sharing their wisdom and their expertise as they help all of us learn and grow and evolve. So thanks again. I will see you on the next Intentional Conversations. Until then, have a beautiful and intentional week.